I dropped by my son-in-law's house unannounced. I walked in, and I froze. My daughter was on her knees in front of her father-in-law. He was grabbing her by the hair, saying, "I'm going to teach you how a real woman should act in her husband's house." The truck's engine ticked as it cooled in the driveway. Stephen Danner sat with his hands still on the steering wheel, staring at the modest ranch house his daughter shared with her husband. The afternoon sun cut harsh angles across the vinyl siding, making everything look washed out and tired. 3 weeks. That's how long it had been since Rose had answered his calls with anything more than clipped one-word responses. He killed the engine. The silence that followed felt wrong, somehow, too thick. Through the windshield, he could see Rose's garden, the one she'd been so excited about last spring, choked with weeds now, the tomato plants brown and sagging against their cages. His chest he tightened. Stephen climbed out of the truck, his work boots crunching on the gravel. His hands still smelled like motor oil despite scrubbing them twice before leaving the shop. He'd closed early, something he never did on a Thursday. But the knot in his stomach had been there all week, growing tighter each time. Rose's voice on the phone sounded smaller, more distant. The side gate stood slightly ajar. He pushed through it, the hinges squeaking. The backyard was quiet except for the hum of a neighbor's air conditioning unit. Rose's car sat in the carport, so she was home. That should have been reassuring. It wasn't. He approached the side door, the one that led into the kitchen. Rose used to leave it unlocked during the day when she was home. Trusting the neighborhood, trusting everything. His hand found the knob. It turned. The moment he stepped inside, he heard it. A man's voice, not Levi's, deeper, rougher. The words were indistinct at first, muffled by the hallway, but the tone cut through everything else. Sharp, cruel, dripping with something that made Stephen Unk's muscles go rigid. He moved through the kitchen without thinking, past the dishes in the sink, past the faded curtains Rose had hung last year. His pulse thundered in his ears, but his breathing stayed controlled, steady. Years of holding it together during his late wife's illness had taught him how to function through fear. The hallway opened into the living room, and there it was, the moment that would split his life into before and after. Rose was on her knees on the beige carpet. Her face was contorted, not in pain, but in something worse. Humiliation. Terror. A man stood over her, his thick fingers tangled in her hair, wrenching her head back at an angle that made Stephen's vision go white at the edges. Leonard Pike, Rose's father-in-law, 62 years old, barrel-chested, with the kind of face that always looked like it was on the edge of anger. His flannel shirt was rolled up to his elbows, and his grip on Rose's hair was so tight, Stephen could see the tension in his forearm. "I'm going to teach you how a real woman should act in her husband's house." Leonard's voice was low, vibrating with false righteousness. "This backtalk, this disrespect, it ends today. You hear me?" Stephen's daughter was crying, not sobbing, but silent tears streaming down her cheeks. Her hands were pressed against the carpet, trembling. And Levi Pike, Rose's husband, the man she'd married 3 years ago in a ceremony filled with white flowers and promises, stood near the doorway to the kitchen, arms crossed, watching. His face wasn't angry or distressed. It was blank, complicit. Stephen Unk's voice cut through the room like a blade. "Let go of her right now." 3 heads turned. Leonard's grip loosened, but only slightly. Levi straightened, his arms dropping to his sides. Rose's eyes found her father's, and something broke open in her expression. Relief and shame and desperate hope all at once. Stephen took a step forward. His hands weren't shaking. That surprised him. They hung loose at his sides, ready, but not clenched. His voice came out even, controlled, carrying the weight of every ounce of restraint he was using. "Not to cross the room and break Leonard Pike's arm." I said, "Let go." Leonard released Rose's hair and stepped back, his expression shifting into something that might have been meant to look casual, innocent, like Stephen had just walked in on a friendly conversation. The transition was so smooth, it was sickening. "Stephen." Leonard's tone was almost jovial. "Didn't know you were stopping by. Get up, Rose." Stephen didn't look at Leonard. He kept his eyes on his daughter. "Get your shoes. You're coming home with me." Rose started to rise, her movements shaky. Levi moved then, stepping forward with his hands raised in a placating gesture. "Dad, this isn't what it looks like. Rose and I were just..." She got a little emotional. And Dad was trying to help calm her down. Levi's voice had that same rehearsed quality he used when he worked at the insurance office. Smooth and practiced. "It's a family disagreement. That's all." Stephen's eyes finally moved to his son-in-law. The younger man was 32, clean-cut, the kind of guy who wore polo shirts on weekends and talked about being a deacon at church. Stephen had thought he was stable, safe, a good match for Rose. He'd been so goddamn wrong, a family disagreement. Stephen repeated the words slowly, tasting them. They left a bitter residue. He looked back at Leonard, who was now standing with his thumbs hooked in his belt loops. Chin up. That what you call grabbing a woman by her hair? Stephen, you're overreacting. Leonard's voice had an edge now. Rose needs to learn. She's leaving now. Something in Stephen's tone made both Pike men take a step back. It wasn't loud. It wasn't aggressive. It was the sound of a door closing. Final and absolute. The sound of a man who had just made a decision and would not be moved from it. Rose found her shoes by the couch, canvas slip-ons, the left one scuffed. Her hand shook as she put them on. Stephen moved to her side, placing himself between her and the pikeman. His hand touched her shoulder, gentle but firm. Come on, sweetheart. Levi started to protest, stepping forward again. You can't just take her. Watch me. Stephen guided Rose toward the door. She moved like someone walking through fog, her breathing shallow and quick. Behind them, Leonard's voice rose, gaining volume. This is wrong, Stephen. A wife's place is with her husband. You're interfering in. Stephen turned at the threshold. One arm still around Rose. He looked at Leonard Pike for 3 full seconds without speaking. The older man's voice died in his throat. Don't come to my house, Stephen said quietly. Don't call. Don't text. If you try, I'm calling the police. He walked Rose through the kitchen, through the side door across the backyard. The late afternoon sun felt too bright after the dim living room. Rose stumbled once on the gravel, and Stephen caught her elbow, steadying her. He opened the passenger door of his truck and helped her in. By the time he walked around to the driver's side, his hands had started shaking. He gripped the steering wheel hard as he pulled out of the driveway. His knuckles white. Rose sat pressed against the passenger door, her arms wrapped around herself. Neither of them spoke for the first 10 minutes of the drive. The radio was off. The only sound was the truck's engine and the occasional whisper of traffic passing in the opposite direction. Stephen Unk's mind was racing, but his face stayed calm. He learned that during the hospital years with his wife, how to keep steady when everything inside was screaming. How to be the rock when the world was crumbling. But this was different. The image of Rose on her knees, Leonard's hand in her hair, kept replaying. Each time it looped, Stephen's grip on the wheel tightened. He forced his jaw to unclench. Forced his breathing to stay even. When they pulled into his driveway, Rose finally spoke. I'm sorry. Her voice was barely audible, scraped raw. Stephen turned off the engine. He looked at her. Really looked at her for the first time since they'd left. Her hair was tangled where Leonard had grabbed it. Her eyes were red-rimmed. She lost weight, he realized. Her collarbones were too prominent above the neckline of her shirt. How'd he miss this? You have nothing to be sorry for, he said, each word deliberate. Certain nothing, Rose. You hear me? She nodded, but tears spilled over again. Stephen reached across and took her hand. It was cold despite the heat of the day. Come on, let's get inside. The kitchen table had been his wife's favorite spot. She'd spent mornings there with her coffee, reading the paper, watching the birds of the feeder outside the window. After she died 6 years ago, Stephen had kept everything exactly the same. Same table, same chairs, same faded placemats. Sometimes it comforted him, sometimes it itched. Now Rose sat in her mother's chair. Both hands wrapped around a mug of tea she hadn't touched. The steam had stopped rising 20 minutes ago. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the kitchen in shades of orange and amber. Stephen sat across from her, waiting, not pushing. He made the tea, set out some crackers she hadn't eaten, and then just sat, quiet, present. Finally, Rose's voice broke the silence. It wasn't always like this. Stephen nodded. Didn't interrupt. When we first got married, Levi was different. Or maybe he wasn't. Maybe I just didn't see it. Her fingers traced the rim of the mug. His family is traditional, he said. Close and kid. They have rules about how things should be. Jitter rolls. I thought it was just, old-fashioned, not harmful. She looked up at her father. The shame in her eyes cut him. When did it change? He asked gently. About a year in, maybe 6 months after we moved into that house. Rose took a shaky breath. Leonard started coming over a lot. He'd sit at our kitchen table and talk to Levi about how to manage a household. I thought it was weird, but Levi said his dad was just looking out for us. Stephen Unk's jaw tightened, but he kept his expression neutral. What kind of management? Everything. The word came out bitter. How I should dress, how I should talk, why I should work. Leonard said a wife should be guided by her husband and his father until she learns the right way. Levi agreed with him. Every time she set the mug down, her hands starting to shake again. Then it got worse. Levi took over her bank accounts. Said he'd handle the money because that's the man's job. He started reading my texts, checking my location on my phone. If I questioned it, he'd get this look. She trailed off, staring at something Stephen couldn't see. What looked? Like I disappointed him, like I was failing at being a wife. Her voice cracked and Leonard, he started correcting me. That's what he called it. If I didn't fold laundry the right way, if I talked back, if I didn't show enough respect. Stephen's hands curled into fists under the table. He hurt you before today. It wasn't a question. Rose nodded slowly. Not at first. At first, it was just grabbing my arm too hard, backing me into corners when he was lecturing me. Then a few months ago, I told Levi I wanted to visit you for your birthday. And Leonard got angry. He said I was putting my birth family above my real family. He pushed me against the wall. Not hard enough to bruise, but hard enough to make his point. The words kept coming faster now, like a dam breaking. Levi locked me outside once. It was February. I'd raised my voice during an argument, and he said I needed to cool off. I stood on the porch for 2 hours before he let me back in. Leonard said it was good for me, that I needed to learn consequences. Stephen felt something cold and hard settling in his chest. Not rage, not yet. Something more calculated, more permanent. They read your messages, he said. That's why you stopped texting me. Levi checks my phone every night. If I delete anything, he knows. Rose wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. I tried to call you a few weeks ago from work, but he found out. He didn't hit me, but he took my car keys. Said I couldn't be trusted to drive alone. Leonard backed him up, said it was protective leadership. Today, Stephen said carefully, what happened before I got there? Rose's face went pale. I asked if I could have $20 for groceries. We were out of milk and Levi had the debit card. Leonard was there and he got so angry. Said asking for money was disrespectful. I should have planned better. I tried to defend myself and he grabbed my hair and forced me down. He said her voice dropped to a whisper. He said he was going to teach me how a real woman behaves in her husband's house. The room fell silent except for the tick of the clock on the wall. Stephen watched his daughter, this person he'd raised, who'd been bright and funny and fearless, reduced to this trembling apologetic shell. None of that is love, he thought. But he didn't say it yet. Instead, he asked one more question. Rose, do you want to go back there? Her answer came immediately, desperate. No. God, no. Dad, please don't make me go back. I won't. The certainty in his voice stopped her spiraling. You're staying here for as long as you need. Forever. If that's what it takes. But Levi will. Levi can try. Stephen Unk's voice stayed level, but there was iron underneath. They both can try, but you're my daughter, and I'm not letting anyone hurt you again. Rose broke, then really broke. Not the quiet tears from before, but deep, racking sobs that shook her whole frame. Stephen moved around the table and pulled her into his arms, holding her the way he had when she was small, and the world had scared her. But this wasn't a scraped knee or a bad dream. This was something that had been breaking her systematically, piece by piece, for more than a year. And as Stephen held his daughter while she cried, something crystallized inside him, a decision, a vow, no forgiveness, no compromises, no mercy. The Pike men had made their choices. Now he'd make his. That night, after Rose had finally fallen asleep in the guest room, her old room, really still with the same blue curtains and the bookshelf she'd filled in high school, Stephen sat at his kitchen table with a notepad and pen. The house was quiet around him. The kind of deep silence that comes after midnight in small southern towns when even the crickets have gone to sleep. The fluorescent light over the stove cast everything in a pale clinical glow. He started writing. Not everything, just the facts he knew, the things Rose had told him, the things he'd seen. Physical assault. Leonard grabbing Rose by the hair. Financial control. Levi taking all bank access isolation. Monitoring her phone. Limiting her movement coercion, Leonard's corrections, Levi locking her outside threats, implicit threats about consequences and respect. Stephen stared at the list. It looked stark on paper, clinical, but underneath each line, he could see Rose's face, hear her voice cracking as she described being pushed against walls, grabbed, monitor controlled. His hand moved to the top of the page and wrote one more line. They would try to get her back because they would men like Leonard and Levi didn't just let go of control. They'd come here. They'd make demands. They'd probably bring the whole Pike family. Paint Stephen as the villain. Claim he was turning Rose against them. He needed to be ready. Stephen pulled out his phone and opened a notes app. Started a new timeline. Year 1, marriage seems normal. Year 2, Leonard's increased involvement. Levi's control begins. Year 3. Escalation, physical intimidation, isolation, today's assault. He thought back over the past year, forcing himself to remember the signs he'd dismissed. Rose canceling Sunday dinners last minute. The way she'd started wearing only jeans and loose shirts, nothing colorful anymore. How she'd stopped talking about her job, stopped sharing stories about her life. He thought she was just settling in a married life, busy, distant the way adult children sometimes got. He'd been blind. Stephen set down his phone and rubbed his eyes. The clock on the microwave read 2:47 a.m. He should sleep. But every time he closed his eyes, he saw a Rose on her knees. He picked up the pen again and wrote one more thing at the bottom of the page. No forgiveness, no compromises. It wasn't a plan yet, but it was a foundation. Friday morning came too early. Stephen woke to sunlight streaming through his bedroom window and the sound of movement in the kitchen. For one disoriented moment, he thought it was his wife making breakfast the way she used to. Then reality settled back in a place. He found Rose at the stove flipping pancakes with mechanical precision. She'd showered, her hair still damp, wearing an old sweatshirt she must have found in her closet. The bruising on her scalp wasn't visible, but Stephen knew it was there. "You didn't have to cook," he said. She glanced at him. "I wanted to. I like doing it when it's my choice." The weight of that sentence hit him squarely in the chest. He poured himself coffee and sat at the table watching her work. The pancakes were perfect, golden brown, fluffy. She'd always been good at this, even as a teenager learning from her mother. They ate in comfortable silence for a few minutes. Then Rose spoke, her voice small. "They're going to come here, aren't they?" "Probably. What are you going to do?" Stephen took a sip of coffee, considering his answer. "Nothing I'm not prepared for. But Rose, I need to ask. Do you want to press charges for what Leonard did?" She froze, fork halfway at her mouth. I don't know. You don't have to decide right now, but we should document everything. Photos, statements, anything that proves what's been happening." He kept his tone and gentle but firm just in case. Rose set down her fork. "Levi will say I'm lying. Then we make sure the truth is louder than his lies." She looked at him, really looked at him, searching his face for something. Whatever she found there made her shoulders straighten slightly. "Okay," she said. "Okay, we document it." After breakfast, Stephen took careful photos of Rose's scalp where Leonard had grabbed her. The area was tender, slightly swollen, with faint bruising starting to show. Then he had her write out everything she could remember, dates, incidents, witnesses, anything that might be useful. By noon, his phone started buzzing. Text from a number he didn't recognize. "Stephen, this is Levi. Please call me. We need to talk about Rose." He deleted it without responding. 5 minutes later, another text. "Dad says you're being unreasonable. Rose belongs here with her family." Stephen showed Rose the messages. "I'm not responding, but I need your permission to block them." She nodded quickly. "Do it." He blocked the number. Then he called Rose's workplace, a veterinary clinic where she worked as a receptionist. He spoke to her supervisor, a woman named Janet, who'd hired Rose right out of college. "Janet, this is Stephen Danner, Rose's father. There's been a family emergency and Rose needs some time off." There was a pause. "Is she okay?" "She will be. Can you work with us on this?" "Of course, Stephen." Janet's voice dropped. "I've been worried about her for months. She hasn't seemed like herself." His chest tightened. "What do you mean?" "She's been anxious, jumpy. A few times I saw her crying in the break room, but when I asked, she said everything was fine. Her husband started picking her up from work instead of letting her drive herself. I thought it was odd, but it's not your place to ask." "Exactly." Janet sighed. "Tell her take all the time she needs. Her job will be here when she's ready." After the call, Stephen found Rose in her room sitting on the edge of the bed with her phone in her hands. "Your boss sent her support," he said. "And you've got time off approved." Rose nodded absently, still staring at her phone. "Levi is calling. Don't answer. He'll just keep calling." Stephen sat beside her. "Then let him. You don't owe him a conversation. You don't owe him anything." She powered off the phone and sat on the nightstand like it might bite her. "I keep thinking," she said quietly, "about how it started so small. How I didn't notice until it was too late. That's how it works. That's how men like them operate." Stephen chose his next words carefully. "None of this is your fault, Rose. Not a single bit of it." She didn't respond, but he saw her throat work as she swallowed hard. That afternoon, the Pike men came. Stephen heard the truck pull into his driveway around 3 o'clock. The distinctive rumble of Leonard's old F-250. He was in the garage organizing tools he didn't need to organize, but it gave him something to do with his hands. Through the garage door window, he watched Leonard and Levi climb out. Both wore expressions of righteous determination. Leonard walked like he owned the property. Levi followed half a step behind, jaw set. Stephen pulled the garage door shut and walked around to meet them in the driveway. He didn't invite them closer. "Stephen." Leonard's tone was clipped. "False friendly. We need to talk about this situation." "There's no situation. Rose is staying here." "She's my wife," Levi said, stepping forward. His voice had that practice quality again. Reasonable but firm. "She belongs at home. Whatever misunderstanding happened yesterday. We can work through it as a family." Stephen Unk's expression didn't change. "Misunderstanding. That's what you're calling it." "Dad was trying to help." Levi continued. "Rose got emotional and your father grabbed my daughter by her hair and forced her to her knees." Stephen Unk's voice cut through the excuse like glass. "There's no misunderstanding about that." Leonard's mask slipped slightly, irritation flashing across his face. "A wife needs guidance. The Bible is clear. Don't." Stephen Unk's voice dropped lower. "Dangerous. Don't quote scripture of me to justify abuse. It's not abuse. It's discipline. You laid hands on my daughter in anger with violence. That's abuse, Leonard." And Levi stood there and let it happen. He shifted his gaze to his son-in-law. "You let your father terrorize your wife." Levi's face flushed. "That's not what happened. You're twisting." "I saw what I saw." Leonard took a step closer, his bulk seeming to fill the space. "This is between a husband and wife. You're interfering in their marriage." "Their marriage?" Stephen almost laughed. "There is no marriage. Not anymore. You can't make that decision." Levi snapped. Real anger breaking through. "Now Rose is my wife. Under law. Under law. What you and your father did is domestic assault. So if you want to talk about legal rights, we can do that. But not here. Not now. This conversation is over." Leonard's face went red. "We have every right to speak to Rose. You can't keep her from us. Rose is a grown woman who's choosing not to see you. I'm respecting her choice." "Respectfully," Levi said, pulling out his phone. "I'm calling her. She won't answer." Levi's thumb hovered over the screen. Then he pressed call, lifting the phone to his ear. After a moment, his jaw clenched. "It's going straight to voicemail." "Like I said," Leonard lunged forward then, faster than Stephen expected for a man his size. He grabbed Stephen's shirt front with both hands, pulling him close. "You listen to me." Stephen's hands came up, breaking Leonard's grip with a sharp practice motion. Years of working with his hands, moving engines and heavy equipment had left him stronger than he looked. He didn't push Leonard away. Just freed himself and stepped back. "Touch me again," Stephen said quietly. "And I'm calling the police. Get off my property." For a moment, Leonard looked like he might swing. Stephen saw it in the way his shoulders bunched, the way his hands curled into fists. Levi grabbed his father's arm. "Dad, come on." Leonard shook him off, but took a step back. "This isn't over, Stephen. Rose's family. She belongs with us." "No," Stephen said. "She doesn't." He turned and walked to his front door, opened it, stepped inside, locked it behind him. Through the living room window. He watched the Pike men stand at his driveway for another 30 seconds before finally climbing back into their truck and leaving. Rose appeared from the hallway, her face pale. "I heard they're gone." "For now," Stephen nodded. "For now." That night, he started making calls. The first call was to his sister, Michelle, who worked as a trauma nurse at Vanderbilt Medical Center in Nashville. She answered on the second ring, her voice warm but tired. "Stevie, everything okay?" He filled her in on everything. The assault, Rose's revelations, the Pike men's visit. Michelle listened without interrupting her, breathing the only sound on the line. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "How is she?" Michelle finally asked, scared, ashamed, trying to hold it together. "That tracks, Stephen. What you described, that's textbook coercive control, financial abuse, isolation, physical intimidation. The escalation pattern is classic." She paused. "Has she seen a doctor?" "Not yet. She needs to, not just for documentation, though that's important for her own health. Trauma like this manifests physically. Stress, weight loss, sleep disruption, anxiety. Let me make some calls. I know someone at the Women's Center here who specializes in domestic abuse cases. She might not be ready for that." Then we go slow. But Stephen, you need to understand recovery from this kind of control takes time. Sometimes years. She's going to need support. Probably therapy. Definitely medical evaluation. Whatever she needs. Good. Michelle's voice softened. And how are you holding up? I'm fine. You're not. I can hear in your voice. You're in combat mode. She wasn't wrong. Stephen looked down at his hands, remembering the controlled way he'd broken Leonard's grip, the coldness in his own voice. They hurt her, Michelle, for months. And I missed it. You couldn't have known. I should have. Don't do that to yourself. Men like the Pikes are experts at hiding abuse. They isolate their victims, control the narrative, make everything look normal from the outside. She exhaled slowly. But Stephen, whatever you're planning, be careful. Men who lose control of their victims can become dangerous. I'm already careful. I mean it. Document everything. Every text, every visit, every threat, and consider filing a restraining order. Rose has to decide that, then help her decide because this won't stop. Men like Leonard don't just walk away. After they hung up, Stephen sat in the dark living room, his phone glowing in his hand. Michelle was right. The Pikes wouldn't stop. They'd escalate. Trying to regain control through pressure, manipulation, or force. He needed more than just good intentions. He needed evidence. A case so solid that when the time came, there'd be no room for doubt. He opened a new note on his phone and started a list. Medical evaluation and documentation, photos of injuries. Rose's written statement. Bank records showing financial control, text messages from Levi, witness statements. Co-workers, neighbors, recording of Rose describing the abuse. That last one made him pause. In Tennessee, you could record conversations you were party to without the other person's consent. If Rose described what happened while he recorded it, that would be admissible evidence. He hated the calculation of it, the coldness. But this wasn't about his comfort. It was about making sure the truth couldn't be buried under Levi's excuses and Leonard's authority. The next morning, he approached Rose carefully over breakfast. I want to record you telling me what happened. Everything with your permission. She looked up from her untouched toast. Why? In case we need it for police, for lawyers, for protection. I won't do it without your consent, and we don't have to use it if you don't want to, but having it might help. Rose considered this. Her fingers tapping against her coffee mug. Okay. Yeah, let's do it. They sat in the living room, Stephen's phone recording between them on the coffee table. Rose spoke for 47 minutes, her voice steady but strained, describing in detail the progression of control, the incident of intimidation, the escalating violence. When she finished, her hands were shaking again. But there was something else in her expression, too. A kind of grim relief. I've never said it all out loud before, she said. Not like that. How does it feel? Terrifying, but also lighter somehow. Stephen saved the recording with a date stamp file name and backed it up to 3 separate locations. Then he reached across and squeezed his daughter's hand. You're brave, Rose. Braver than you know. She shook her head. I'm not brave. I'll let it happen for so long. You survived. That's brave. Before she could argue, Stephen Unk's phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. This is Janet from the clinic. One of Rose's co-workers wants to talk to you about what she witnessed. Can I give her your number? Stephen showed Rose the message. You have a choice here, but it might help. Rose nodded slowly. Tell her yes. 20 minutes later, Stephen Unk's phone rang. A young woman's voice, nervous but determined. Mr. Danner, this is Ashley. I work with Rose at the clinic. Thanks for calling. Is she okay? We've all been so worried. Her husband Ashley trailed off, then gathered herself. Look, I don't know if this helps, but I've seen things. Heard things. If you're trying to help Rose, I want to tell you what I know. Stephen grabbed his notepad. I'm listening. Ashley described 6 months of observations. Levi showing up unannounced to check on Rose during her shifts. Rose crying in the break room and making excuses about stress. A day when Rose came to work with a sore wrist she claimed she'd slept on wrong. Most damning, a conversation Ashley had overheard between Rose and Levi in the parking lot. He was going through her purse, Ashley said, like actually dumping it out on the hood of his truck. He found a receipt for lunch she'd bought for herself, and he got so angry. He told her she was wasting family resources and that she needed to ask permission for purchases. Rose just stood there apologizing over and over. When was this? 3 months ago, maybe late June. Stephen wrote it down. Would you be willing to provide a written statement or testify if it comes to that? Absolutely. Whatever helps Rose. 2 more co-workers called over the next few days. A woman who'd noticed bruises on Rose's arms that she'd hidden with long sleeves in summer. A man who'd seen Leonard Pike corner Rose outside the clinic, lecturing her about proper behavior while Rose shrank against the building. Each conversation added another piece to the picture. And each one made Stephen's resolve harden. On Sunday, a week after the living room incident, Stephen stood in his backyard watering the scraggly lawn and thinking about next steps. Rose was inside reading. Actually reading something she said she hadn't done in months because Levi thought it was wasted time. A car pulled up at the curb. Not the Pikes. Stephen didn't recognize the vehicle at first. A newer Honda sedan, dark green. A young woman got out. Mid-20s, blonde hair pulled back in a ponytail. She looked nervous, glancing around as if checking to see if she was being followed. She approached the fence slowly. "Mr. Danner, that's me. I'm Nora Pike, Levi's sister." She said it quickly like ripping off a bandage. Stephen Unk's grip tightened on the hose. "If you're here to, I'm not." She held up her hands. "Please, I need to talk to you about my family." "About Rose?" He studied her for a long moment. There was something different about her. A weariness in her eyes, a tension in her shoulders. Not the aggressive certainty of Leonard or Levi. "Wait here." He turned off the hose and went inside. Found Rose in the living room. "Levi's sister is outside. Does she want to talk?" Rose's face went white. "Nora, what does she want?" "Claims she wants to help, but you don't have to see her. I can send her away." Rose stood, her book falling, forgotten, to the couch. "No, let me talk to her." They went outside together. Nora stood by the fence, hands shoved in her pockets. When she saw Rose, her expression crumpled slightly. "Rose. God, I'm so sorry." "Sorry for what?" Rose's voice was guarded. "For all of it, for not stopping it, for being part of that family." Nora looked between them. "I've been trying to get away from them for years. My dad, as he's controlled all of us our whole lives. Levi learned everything from him." Stephen crossed his arms. "Why are you here, Nora?" "Because what happened to Rose isn't new. It's how our family operates. My dad believes in traditional authority, which really means he gets to control everyone, especially the women. My mom left when I was 15 because she couldn't take it anymore. Levi and I stayed with Dad, and he shaped Levi into a copy of himself. That doesn't excuse what they did," Rose said quietly. "I know. I'm not making excuses. I'm telling you that you're not the first person my father has heard, and my brother has become just like him." Nora pulled her phone from her pocket. "I have proof. Recordings, texts, videos, things that show the pattern. I've been collecting them." Because she swallowed hard. "Because I always knew someday someone would need them. I'm giving them to you." Stephen and Rose exchanged a glance. "Why?" Stephen asked. "Because it needs to stop. Because I'm tired of watching my family destroy people." Nora's voice shook. "And because Rose didn't deserve any of this. None of the women who've married into our family did." "Women?" Rose's voice was small, plural. "Levi's first girlfriend. She lasted 6 months before she left. So my dad scared her. And my older cousin married a woman who lasted 2 years before filing for divorce. She claimed emotional abuse. But the family rallied around my cousin and made her look unstable. She moved to Texas to get away from us." Stephen felt something cold settle deeper in his chest. "Your father has done this before. Over and over. He believes he's righteous. That God gave him authority over his family, and that includes daughters-in-law, nieces, anyone in his sphere. He sees himself as a patriarch in a biblical sense, which really means he's a controlling, abusive man who uses religion as an excuse." Nora held out her phone. "Everything's here. Videos from family gatherings where you can hear him yelling at people, berating them. Texts where Levi admits Dad keeps Rose in check. Recordings of Dad lecturing me about submission and obedience. I'll send you everything." And she hesitated. "And if you press charges, I'll testify against both of them." Rose's eyes filled with tears. "Nora, if you do that, your family will. They'll disown me. I know, but they don't feel like family anymore. They feel like a prison." Nora looked at Stephen. "Please, let me help. It's the least I can do." Stephen took her phone number and promised to call. As Nora drove away, Rose stood in the driveway looking stunned. She was always the quiet one. Rose said, "I never thought. Abuse victims often become the strongest advocates." Stephen said she's been trapped, too, just in a different way. That night, Nora sent over 23 files. Videos of Leonard verbally berating family members at gatherings. His voice dripping with contempt. Text screenshots where Levi discussed managing Rose with his father. A particularly damning video from a barbecue where Leonard grabbed Nora's wrist hard enough to leave marks when she questioned one of his statements. Stephen watched each file methodically, taking notes. The pattern was unmistakable. Leonard Pike was a systematic abuser who built his entire family structure around control, and Levi had learned every technique. But now Stephen had proof. Not just Rose's word against theirs. Multiple witnesses, multiple incidents, a pattern spanning years. He added everything to an encrypted folder on his laptop and backed it up in 3 locations. Then he opened a new document and started outlining a timeline. Every incident, every witness, every piece of evidence, organized chronologically. It took him until 2 a.m. when he finally finished. He had 17 pages of documented abuse spanning 3 years involving multiple victims with corroborating statement from 6 witnesses. Rose appeared in the kitchen doorway wrapped in a bathrobe. "Can't sleep, just finishing something." She sat across from him, looking at the pages spread across the table. "Is that enough to make them stop?" "It's a start." Stephen met her eyes. "Rose, I need to ask you something and you can say no, but I think we should file charges for assault, coercion, and financial abuse against both of them." Her face went pale. "That's that serious. What they did is serious. But if we do that, there's no going back. It becomes official, public." Her hands twisted together. "Everyone will know. Everyone should know. Men like Leonard and Levi count on shame and silence. They count on their victims being too scared to speak up." Stephen reached across and took her hands, stealing them. "But this is your choice. I'll support you either way. If you want to walk away, rebuild quietly. I understand. But if you want to fight back, I'm with you. All the way." Rose stared at their joined hands for a long time. When she looked up, something had shifted in her expression. Something hard and certain. "I want to fight back," she said. "I want them to face consequences for what they did. Not just to me, to everyone." "You're sure?" "I'm sure." Stephen squeezed her hands once, then let go. "Okay, then we do this, right? Monday morning, we go to the police together." "What? They don't believe us." Stephen tapped the stack of papers on the table. "They will." The rest of the weekend passed in tense preparation. Stephen and Rose went over every detail, making sure the timeline was accurate, the statements were clear, the evidence was organized. Michelle drove up from Nashville on Sunday afternoon to take Rose to a private medical appointment where a doctor documented the physical effects of prolonged stress and noted the healing bruises on her scalp. "Your blood pressure is elevated," the doctor told Rose gently. "You've lost 15 pounds since your last physical. You're showing signs of chronic stress and anxiety. These are all consistent with trauma." The medical report went into the folder. Sunday evening, Stephen sat on his back porch watching the sun set over Cedar Brook. The sky was bruised, purple and orange, the air thick with humidity. He could hear neighbors' conversations drifting over fences, the distant sound of someone's television, the bark of a dog. Normal Sunday, evening sounds, normal life. Except nothing felt normal anymore. Tomorrow would change everything. Once they filed charges, there'd be no taking it back. The Pikes would fight. They'd hire lawyers. They'd try to paint Rose as unstable, him as interfering. They'd use their church connections, their standing in the community, every advantage they had. But Stephen had something they didn't, the truth. And he was willing to fight for it longer and harder than they could fight against it. Rose joined him on the porch, sitting in her mother's old rocking chair. "Nervous?" she asked. "Determined." "Me, too." She was quiet for a moment. "Dad, thank you for not letting me go back. For believing me always, sweetheart. Always." They sat together until full dark, neither speaking. Both gathering strength for what came next. Monday morning arrived gray and cool, unusual for late summer in Tennessee. The forecast called for rain, and the clouds hung low and heavy, turning the world the color of stone. Stephen wore clean work pants and a button-down shirt. Rose wore jeans and a simple blouse, her hair pulled back. They both looked tired. Neither had slept well. The Cedar Brook Police Department occupied a low brick building on Main Street, sandwiched between the post office and a hardware store. Stephen had driven past it 1,000 times. He never imagined walking through those doors to report his own son-in-law and father-in-law for domestic violence. The lobby smelled like burnt coffee and old carpet. A young officer at the front desk looked up as they entered. "Help you folks. We need to file a report," Stephen said. His voice was steady for domestic assault and abuse. The officer's expression shifted, becoming more attentive. "Let me get someone for you. Have a seat." They sat in hard plastic chairs, bolted to the floor. Rose's leg bounced nervously. Stephen placed a hand on her knee, stilling it, and she gave him a weak smile. 10 minutes later, a woman in plain clothes emerged from the back. Late 40s, dark hair and a practical blonde, sharp eyes that took in everything. "I'm Detective Sarah Morales. Why don't you come back with me?" "No, wait." User said, "Don't use the name Sarah. Let me fix that." 10 minutes later, a woman in plain clothes emerged from the back. Late 40s, dark hair and a practical blonde, sharp eyes that took in everything. "I'm Detective Patricia Morales. Why don't you come back with me?" She led them to a small interview room with a table for chairs and a recording camera mounted in the corner. The walls were beige. The floor was scuffed linoleum. Everything about the space felt designed to strip away pretense. "Before we start," Detective Morales said, settling in her chair, "I want you to know that reporting domestic violence takes courage. We take these cases seriously. I'm going to ask you questions, and some of them might be difficult. Take your time. We'll record this conversation for documentation purposes." "Okay." Rose nodded. Stephen said, "Understood. Who are we talking about here? Who's the victim? Who's the abuser?" "I'm the victim," Rose said, her voice stronger than Stephen expected. "My husband, Levi Pike, and my father-in-law, Leonard Pike." Detective Morales began taking notes. "Tell me what happened." Rose started with last Thursday, the living room, Leonard's assault, Stephen Unk's intervention. Her voice trembled at first, but gained strength as she went. Detective Morales didn't interrupt, just nodded occasionally, her pen moving steadily across the page. When Rose finished that part, the detective looked up, "And your father witnessed this?" "All of it," Stephen confirmed. "I saw Leonard Pike grab my daughter by her hair and force her to her knees. I heard him threaten to teach her how a real woman should act. My son-in-law stood there and did nothing." "Can you describe Leonard Pike's exact actions? How he grabbed her where, how hard?" Stephen described it in careful detail. The grip, the angle, the visible strain on Leonard's forearm, Rose's position on the floor. The detective wrote everything down. "But that's not all." Rose said, "It's been going on for more than a year. The violence, the control, it's systematic." She described the progression. Financial control, phone monitoring, isolation, physical intimidation, Levi locking her outside, Leonard's escalating corrections. Stephen watched Detective Morales' expression shift from professional attention to something harder, more personal. "Do you have evidence of any of this?" the detective asked. Stephen produced the folder. Written statements from Rose, witness statements from her co-workers, text messages, medical documentation, bank records showing financial control, recordings, he said on the table between them. "It's all here." Detective Morales opened the folder and began reading. The room fell silent except for the rustle of paper. 2 pages in, she looked up. "This is extensive. It's systematic." Stephen repeated Rose's word. "This isn't a one-time incident. It's a pattern of abuse." The detective spent 20 minutes going through every page. She asked clarifying questions, requested contact information for the witnesses, made her own notes. When she reached Nora Pike's statements, she paused. "This is the defendant's sister." "Yes," Rose said. "She's willing to testify against them." "That's unusual. She's been dealing with their abuse her whole life." Detective Morales closed the folder and looked at Rose directly. "Ms. Danner, I'm sorry, Miss Pike." "Danner." Rose interrupted quietly. "I'm going back to my maiden name. Ms. Danner. Based on what you've told me in this evidence, we have grounds for multiple charges. Domestic assault, coercive control, false imprisonment, financial abuse. Are you prepared for what comes next? This will mean investigations, possible arrest, court proceedings. Your husband and father-in-law will know you filed charges. I know they may retaliate. I know that, too." Detective Morales nodded slowly. "Good, because I need you to be sure. Once we start this process, it's going to be difficult. These cases often are." Rose's hands were clasped tight on the table, but her voice didn't waver. "I'm sure I want to press charges against both of them." "All right." The detective looked at Stephen. "And you're willing to testify as a witness?" "Absolutely." "Then here's what happens next. I'm going to take your full statement, document everything and pass this to our DA's office. They'll review the evidence and decide on charges. If they move forward, and based on what I'm seeing here, warrants will be issued. Do either of you know where the Pikes are right now?" "Levi works at Secure Life Insurance on Cypress Street." Rose said, "Leonard's usually a home for 28 Oakmont Road." Detective Morales wrote it down. "We'll coordinate with patrol. When we make arrests, we do it carefully. Mr. Danner, I recommend you and your daughter stay somewhere these men don't know about for the next few days. Do you have somewhere safe you can go? Stephen hadn't thought of that. My sister's in Nashville. That's probably smart. Just until things settle. She stood. I'll need a couple more hours with Rose to get her complete statement. Mr. Danner, you're welcome to wait or come back. I'll wait. Rose gave him a grateful look as Detective Morales led her to a different room for the detailed interview. Stephen sat in the lobby, his phone in his hands, watching people come and go. A woman filing a noise complaint. A man reporting a stolen bicycle. Normal problems for a Monday morning. His problem was far from normal. 3 hours later, Rose emerged looking exhausted. Detective Morales walked them to the door. We'll move fast on this, she said. Expect calls from the DA's office within 48 hours. And Ms. Danner, you did the right thing. Rose nodded wordlessly. In the truck, Stephen pulled out onto Main Street and headed toward the highway. We're going to Michelle's. What about your shop? I'll call my assistant manager. He can handle it for a few days. Rose leaned her head against the window, watching Cedarbrook slide past. It's really happening. It is. I thought I'd feel relieved. I just feel tired. That's normal. They drove in silence for a while. The rain started halfway to Nashville. Light at first, then heavier, drumming against the windshield. Stephen turned on the wipers and kept his eyes on the road. Rose spoke again, softer this time. Do you think they'll actually go to jail? If there's justice. Yes. What if there isn't? Stephen glanced at her. Then we keep fighting until there is. Michelle's house was a small ranch in a quiet Nashville suburb. She met them at the door, immediately pulling Rose into a hug. You did it, Michelle said. You really did it. We did. Rose said. Dad and they spent that evening laying low, ordering takeout, watching mindless television. Stephen found himself checking his phone constantly, waiting for news. None came. Tuesday morning, Detective Morales called. Mr. Danner. The DA reviewed the case. They're filing charges. Multiple counts against both men. We're executing warrants this afternoon. Stephen's grip tightened on the phone. Where? Levi Pike at his workplace. Leonard Pike at his residence. We'll call you when it's done. Thank you, Detective. Thank you, daughter. She's brave. After the call, Stephen found Rose in Michelle's guest room, sitting on the bed with her arms wrapped around her knees. They're arresting them today, he said. Her eyes went wide. Today, this afternoon. Detective Morales will call when it's done. Rose nodded slowly, processing. It's really over. This part is at 4:37 p.m. Stephen's phone rang. Mr. Danner, Detective Morales, both warrants have been executed. Levi Pike was arrested at work without incident. Leonard Pike was arrested at home. He resisted initially but complied once he realized we were serious. Both men are in custody awaiting arraignment. Stephen closed his eyes briefly. Thank you. There's something you should know. When we arrested Levi at his office, several co-workers commented that they weren't surprised. Said he'd been controlling toward female staff. We're looking into whether there are additional victims. After hanging up, Stephen walked into the living room where Rose and Michelle were waiting. He didn't have to say anything. His expression said it all. Rose stood abruptly. They arrested them, both of them. They're in custody. She made a sound, half laugh, half sob, and sat back down hard. Michelle moved to her side, holding her as she broke down. Not in grief, Stephen realized, in relief. In release, he stood watching his daughter cry, feeling something shift in his chest. Not satisfaction. He wasn't capable of that. Not yet. But certainty. They'd done the right thing. The hard thing. The thing that would stick. That night, the three of them sat on Michelle's back deck under a sky clearing after rain. The air smelled clean washed. Rose looked more relaxed than Stephen had seen her in months. What happens now? She asked. Arraignment probably tomorrow or Thursday, Stephen said. Then court proceedings if they don't take a plea deal. Will I have to testify? Possibly. Depends on whether it goes to trial. Rose was quiet for a moment. I'll do it if I have to. I'll tell the truth. Michelle squeezed her shoulder. You won't be alone. We'll all be there. I know. Rose looked at her father. Dad, I don't think I've properly said thank you for everything, for believing me, for fighting for me. You don't need to thank me. You're my daughter. Still, her voice broke slightly. You saved my life. Literally, if you hadn't come that day, Stephen didn't let her finish. But I did, and you're here, and you're safe. That's what matters. They sat together until the stars came out. Three people bonded by blood and by battle, finding peace in the quiet after the storm. The arraignment happened Thursday morning at the Hamilton County Courthouse. Stephen and Rose sat in the gallery. Detective Morales nearby. Leonard and Levi Pike were brought in wearing orange jumpsuits, wrist shackled. Leonard looked furious. Levi looked shocked, like he couldn't believe this was happening. The judge, a stern woman in her 60s named Judge Harriet Chun. Wait, user said don't use Chun. Let me fix that. The judge, a stern woman in her 60s named Judge Harriet Wallace, read the charges in flat, professional voice. Leonard Pike, you charged with domestic assault in the second degree, aggravated harassment, intimidation, and coercive control. Levi Pike, you're charged with domestic assault, coercive control, false imprisonment, and financial exploitation. How do you plead? Their lawyer, a slick L-looking man in an expensive suit, stood. Not guilty on all counts, Your Honor. Noted, bail is set at $75,000 each. Preliminary hearing is scheduled for 3 weeks from today. Judge Wallace's eyes flicked to Rose. Ms. Danner, there is a restraining order in effect. Both defendants are prohibited from contacting you or approaching within 500 feet if they violate this order. Call the police immediately. Yes, Your Honor. As the Pikes were let out, Leonard turned and locked eyes with Stephen. The look was pure venom, filled with rage and promised retribution. Stephen met his gaze without blinking until the deputies pulled Leonard from the courtroom. Outside on the courthouse steps, Detective Morales briefed them. The DA is confident. We've got solid evidence, multiple witnesses, and the defendant's own texts working against them. But I need to warn you, their lawyer is going to try to discredit Rose's testimony. They'll paint her as unstable, claim you influenced her, maybe suggest financial motivations. Let them try, Stephen said. We have the truth. Truth isn't always enough in court. Mr. Danner, you need to be prepared for this to get ugly. It's already ugly, Rose said quietly. It can't get worse than what they did. Over the next 3 weeks, the Pikes' defense strategy became clear. Their lawyer filed motions claiming Rose was mentally unstable, that Stephen had brainwashed her, that the financial control was simply responsible household management. They tried to get Nora's testimony excluded, claiming family bias. None of it worked. The preliminary hearing came and went. The judge finding sufficient evidence to proceed to trial. The DA offered a plea deal, reduced charges in exchange for guilty plea. Leonard refused. Levi wavered, but ultimately followed his father's lead, so went to trial. The trial began on a crisp November morning, 2 months after that Thursday afternoon, in the living room. The courthouse buzzed with activity, but courtroom 3B was quiet when they entered, just the sound of shoes on tile and papers rustling. Stephen sat in the front row behind the prosecution table. Rose sat beside him, dressed in a simple navy dress. Her hands folded in her lap. She gained back 5 pounds, the dark circles under her eyes had faded. She looked stronger. The prosecution laid out their case methodically. They started with Stephen's testimony, what he'd witnessed that Thursday, his daughter's condition, the mark on her scalp. The defense attorney, a man named Richard Cross, tried to shake him during cross-examination. Mr. Danner, isn't it true that you disapproved of your daughter's marriage from start? No. You never had concerns about the Pike family? Not until I learned they were abusing my daughter. Or was this about control? You couldn't stand that Rose had a new family. Stephen's voice stayed level. This is about a grown man assaulting my daughter in her own home while her husband watched. That's what I saw. That's what happened. Cross tried to rattle him for 20 minutes. It didn't work. Stephen had spent weeks preparing, going over every detail with the prosecutor. He knew what he'd seen, and he refused to be shaken from it. Rose testified next. She spoke clearly, describing the pattern of abuse, the escalation, the fear. Cross tried the same tactics, suggesting she was emotionally unstable, that she'd misinterpreted firm guidance as abuse, that she'd been influenced by her father. Ms. Danner, you admit your father recorded your statement. Isn't it possible he coached you on what to say? No, he recorded the truth. My truth. But you were emotional, vulnerable. Maybe you said what you thought he wanted to hear. Rose's voice hardened. I said, what happened? Leonard Pike grabbed my hair and forced me to my knees. Levi Pike controlled every aspect of my life. Those are facts, not feelings. The jury, 8 women from men, watched intently. The prosecution called Rose's co-workers. Each one described her deterioration over the past year. The tears, the anxiety, the bruises she tried to hide. Ashley's testimony about the parking lot confrontation was particularly powerful. Then Nora took the stand. She looked small in the witness box, but her voice was steady. She described growing up under Leonard's control, watching him berate her mother until she fled, seeing Levi adopt the same tactics. She described the family's pattern of abuse spanning decades. Cross attacked her credibility viciously, suggesting she was testifying out of spite that she'd fabricated evidence to hurt her family. But Nora didn't break. She'd spent too many years under Leonard's thumb to be intimidated by a lawyer. "My father is an abusive man," she said simply. "My brother learned from him. Rose is one victim in a long line of victims. I'm testifying because it needs to stop." The prosecution played the videos Nora had provided. The jury watched Leonard verbally destroying family members, grabbing Nora's wrist, creating an atmosphere of fear and control. They heard Levi's texts admitting his father keeps Rose in check. By the end of the first week, the defense was scrambling. Leonard took the stand to defend himself. A mistake. He couldn't hide his contempt, his belief that he had the right to control his family. When asked about grabbing Rose, he said, "Sometimes women need firm correction. It's biblical. She was being disrespectful, and I was teaching her the proper way to conduct herself." The prosecutor pounced. "You believe you have the right to physically assault your daughter-in-law. It wasn't assault. It was discipline. You grabbed her by her hair and forced her to her knees. That's your definition of discipline. She needed to learn respect." The jury's expressions shifted. Several women looked disgusted. Levi testified next, trying to paint himself as a caring husband who'd been misunderstood, but under cross-examination, he admitted monitoring Rose's phone, controlling their bank accounts, allowing his father to guide their marriage. He claimed it was all for Rose's own good. Did Rose want to be monitored and controlled? The prosecutor asked. It was what was best for her. That wasn't my question. Did she want it? Levi hesitated. She was my wife. It was my responsibility. So, no, she didn't want it, but you did it anyway. I was being a good husband by your father's definition. The trial lasted 9 days. On the 10th day, closing arguments began. The defense claimed Rose was unstable. Stephen was controlling and the pikemen had simply been trying to maintain a traditional family structure that had been misinterpreted as abuse. The prosecution didn't mince words. The defense wants you to believe this is about misunderstanding, about traditional values. But what you've heard over the past 9 days isn't about tradition. It's about power, control, violence. The prosecutor gestured toward Rose. Rose Danner trusted her husband and his family. She believed their promises of love and partnership. Instead, she got systematic abuse, financial control, physical assault, isolation from her support network. This isn't a family disagreement. This is domestic violence. And the defendants need to be held accountable. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. When they returned, the foreman, a woman in her 50s, stood and read the verdict. On the charge of domestic assault against Leonard Pike, guilty. On the charge of coercive control against Leonard Pike, guilty. On the charge of intimidation against Leonard Pike, guilty for Levi. On the charge of coercive control, guilty. On the charge of financial exploitation, guilty. On the charge of false imprisonment, guilty. Rose made a sound beside Stephen. A gasp. A sob. He couldn't tell. He took her hand and held it tightly. Judge Wallace addressed the convicted man. Mr. Pike. Mr. Pike, what you did to this young woman represents a profound betrayal of trust and a systematic pattern of abuse. This court has heard testimony detailing how you worked together to isolate, control, and intimidate Ms. Danner. Your family structure was not traditional. It was designed around domination and fear. The evidence against you is overwhelming. The jury's verdict is clear and this court will not tolerate domestic violence in any form. She set sentencing for 2 weeks later. At the sentencing hearing, Leonard Pike received 4 years. Levi received 3. Both would be required to attend domestic violence intervention programs. Both would be prohibited from contacting Rose for 10 years after their release. As the baifs led them away, Leonard shouted something about justice being perverted, about his rights being violated. Levi just looked broken, finally understanding what he'd lost. Stephen felt Rose lean against him, exhausted. He put his arm around her and held her up. Outside the courthouse, reporters had gathered. Detective Morales helped them navigate past the cameras. In a parking lot, Rose finally let herself cry. Deep cleansing tears that shook her whole body. "It's over," she said between sobs. "It's really over." "It is," Stephen confirmed. "You did it, sweetheart. You stood up to them, and you won. We did it. You and me." Stephen looked at his daughter. This person who'd been broken down and rebuilt, who'd found courage when it mattered most, who'd fought back against men who tried to destroy her spirit. "Yeah," he said softly. "We did." Spring came to Cedarbrook with dogwoods blooming white against green hills and the air turning soft and sweet. 6 months had passed since the trial. 6 months of slow, steady healing. Rose had moved into a small rental house on the east side of town, a cottage with a front porch and a yard just big enough for a garden. She'd planted tomatoes again, and this time they were thriving. She'd gone back to work at the clinic part-time, slowly rebuilding relationships with coworkers who testified for her. She'd started therapy 1 hour every week with a woman who specialized in trauma recovery. The divorce had been finalized in February. Rose Danner legally and completely. No ties left to Levi Pike except the memories, and those were fading. She was taking evening classes at the community college, something she'd always wanted to do, but Levi had dismissed as frivolous. Literature and art history, subjects that fed her soul. Stephen watched his daughter slowly return herself. Not the person she'd been before, Levi, but someone new, stronger, more grounded, someone who knew her own worth. On a Saturday evening in late April, Stephen stood at his grill in the backyard flipping burgers. Rose sat in one of the lawn chairs, her feet bare on the grass, reading a book for her lit class. The sunset painted everything gold. "Dad." Rose looked up from her book. "Yeah. Do you ever think about them? About what happened?" Stephen flipped a burger, considering sometimes. "Do you feel bad about it? About how things turn out for them?" He looked at his daughter. She was wearing a sundress, yellow with small flowers that she'd bought for herself without asking permission, without worrying if someone would approve. Her hair was loose around her shoulders. She looked content. "Free?" "No," he said simply. "They made their choices. I made mine." Rose nodded slowly, something settling in her expression. "I don't either. I thought maybe I would eventually. Like maybe I'd feel guilty or sad about Levi going to prison, but I just don't. He hurt me. His father hurt me. They would have kept hurting me if you hadn't stopped them. You stopped them, too. When you walked out that door with me, when you testified, that took more courage than anything I did. We both did what we had to do. We did." They fell into comfortable silence. The kind of quiet that comes from shared experience and deep trust. A cardinal called from the oak tree at the property line somewhere down the street. Kids were playing, their laughter carrying on the breeze. "I'm proud of you," Stephen said. "Your mom would be too." Rose smiled, a real smile, the kind that reached her eyes. "I'm proud of us. We didn't let them win." "No, we didn't." Stephen played the burgers and they ate on the patio as the sun dropped behind the hills. They talked about Rose's classes, about the new assistant Stephen had hired at the shop, about Michelle's upcoming visit. Normal things, everyday things. As darkness gathered and the first stars appeared, Rose stood and stretched. "I should get going. Early shift tomorrow." Stephen walked her to her car, an old Honda. She'd bought herself with money she'd saved from her job. Her money, her choice. Before she got in, she hugged him tight. "Thank you, Dad, for everything, for seeing, for believing, for fighting. Always, sweetheart, always." He watched her tail lights disappear down the street, then stood in his driveway for a while longer, looking up at the stars. The night air was cool and clean. The neighborhood was quiet. For the first time in months, Stephen felt something close to peace. Not because he'd forgiven the pikemen. He hadn't, and he never would. What they'd done to Rose, to Nora, to others, that wasn't something that could be forgiven. It could only be stopped, punished, made impossible to repeat. But he'd done that. Rose had done that. Together, they'd taken something broken and made it right as it could be made. They'd fought for justice, and they'd won. Stephen turned and walked back into his house, leaving the door unlocked because this was Cedarbrook and Rose was safe and the Pike men were behind bars where they belonged. He made himself a cup of coffee, decaf since it was late, and sat at his kitchen table with a book of his own, but he didn't read. He just sat there thinking about his daughter's smile, her yellow sundress, the way she'd look sitting in his yard with her bare feet in the grass. Free, that was the word. She was free. And for Stephen Danner, that was everything. Outside, the night deepened. The stars wheeled overhead. The world kept turning. And in a small house on the east side of Cedarbrook, Rose Danner slept peacefully, no longer afraid, no longer trapped, finally, and completely herself. The story of what had happened in that living room 6 months ago would fade with time. People would move on to other scandals, other stories, but the truth would remain documented and preserved, a warning to anyone who thought they could abuse their power over those they claimed to love. Leonard and Levi Pike had learned that lesson the hard way. And Stephen Danner had learned something, too. That sometimes love means fighting, not with fists or rage, but with truth and evidence and unshakable determination. That sometimes the most important thing a father can do is stand between his child and danger no matter the cost. He paid no real cost in the end. Lost no sleep over the Pikes' imprisonment. Felt no guilt over their fate. They'd earned every consequence that came their way. And Rose had earned her freedom. That was justice, and that was enough.